cultured pearls, or you can have natural pearls. So a natural pearl is you open up that oyster, there's a pearl, what a wonderful gift. So of course that's how pearls started out. Way back when people started, harvesting oysters for food, and they would open up an oyster and there would be a pearl. Well, those sources of natural pearls were really exhausted by the 1900s, really by mid-1800s. It became harder and harder, and even now, it's about for every oyster, every 10,000 oysters, maybe there's one oyster. I have found a natural pearl before, and let me tell you, I lost it. It was the size of a sesame seed. So even though we're talking about natural pearls, it's not like this glorious, huge, beautiful, fabulous pearl. So even though you might come across a natural pearl, that might not mean it's even big enough to stick a hole through to wear it, that kind of thing. So in the world of cultured pearls, Mikimoto. Y'all might have heard the name Mikimoto. He was the son of a noodle farmer, a noodle maker in Japan. And he saw this trend of there are no natural pearls, and what if we could make actual cultured pearls? Well, there were a few people out there that had already kind of figured out how to start that pearl making process. He took those patents, so he's basically the first person who patented how to culture a pearl. It took him 5 years, a whole lot of money. He and his wife were almost broke by 1895 when they cultured their very first pearl. And then from there, they started creating the cultured pearl industry. And at the time, people were like very anti-cultured pearls, as you can imagine. Up to that point, there were only natural pearls. So then everybody's like, well, what is this? What's a cultured pearl? Now, basically, a cultured pearl, like I said, just means something was inserted in the oyster to start the pearl-making process. So, at the time, he's doing it in the ocean. And he sees the value in doing that in fresh water. And that gets to a lot of our distinctions between freshwater and saltwater pearls. Saltwater pearls are labor intensive, and they are very subject to environmental impacts, water quality, all of that. Well, you can control a lot of that. If you think about a big lake or even a pond, you can control a lot of those water issues. So there was Lake Biwa, which was in Japan, and he decided to start culturing pearls in Lake Biwa. He could not figure out how to do it. So here's the man. I mean, he is still, everybody knows he's become a big trade name, Mikimoto. So he could do it in salt water, but he could not figure out how to do it in fresh water. And his freshwater pearls looked like Rice Krispies. And they're called Biwa pearls. You've probably heard about it. Beautiful, beautiful pearls. Biwa, because that was the name of the lake.
How do you spell it?
B-I-W-A.
Okay.
So it was Lake Biwa, so they're known as Biwa pearls.
And they little skinny things.
They look like rice.
Yeah, they really look like a rice, or really a little puffed rice. So they're beautiful. I mean, they had great luster to them. They were beautiful, but nobody was accepting these after they'd seen, these beautiful other cultured pearls. Well, World War II happened. Basically, Lake Biwa became unable, they weren't able to use Lake Biwa. He went back to just doing saltwater pearls. China, at the time, thought, well, we want to try to work on doing these freshwater pearls. We can see the value in doing freshwater pearls. So they took over the production of freshwater pearls. 98% of the world's freshwater pearls do come from China now, so they've really taken over that process. They also do saltwater pearls off the coast of China as well. So, what is the difference so let me go back and say, saltwater and freshwater, you can have cultured pearls in both types of water. So it just means human intervention has started that pearl making process. So there is no distinction between a cultured pearl or a freshwater pearl. Why people created that distinction is based on those Biwa pearls, because they were suddenly wompy, funky looking pearls became synonymous with freshwater pearls. So that's where that distinction was created. But now there are gem quality freshwater pearls. I like dealing with freshwater pearls in the Pearl Pearls collection. So there are 5 major differences between a saltwater and a freshwater cultured pearl. Chemically, they are almost identical. So the actual pearl, material is the same. The only difference is there's a mineral, manganese, and it's slightly higher in freshwater pearls. So they have these X-ray machines that can test mineral composition, and that's how they can tell, like if you took your pearls somewhere and said, are these freshwater or saltwater, that's one way they'd be able to tell. They could see that manganese content. But besides that, basically, the pearl is the pearl, so there's chemically not that much difference in the pearl. There is a difference in how they are cultured, and this is part of the reason why Mikimoto had a hard time with this. When you take an oyster, the gonad, which I think is a very unattractive word, but that's the sort of the reproductive thing going. That's the most accessible area to an oyster. So in saltwater pearls, what they do is they insert a bead in that reproductive membrane, and that's where they make the pearl. Because there's only one gonad, they're really only culturing one pearl at a time inside those oysters. Now, a freshwater pearl is different. When the freshwater mollusk, what they do is and I've got a little shell here actually, I'll show you. So here's the shell, and this is from a freshwater, it's called a triangle mussel, and it's got soft tissue, if you can imagine, inside of this. They insert other pieces of tissue from another donor mussel inside that soft tissue. So they can put multiple pieces inside that soft tissue. So that's one of our major differences. A saltwater oyster is really only producing 1, maybe 2 pearls at a time. A freshwater mussel is producing multiple pearls at a time. A saltwater pearl on the inside has a bead inside of it made of shell. And they actually, most all of the shells come from the Tennessee River Valley, which is kind of exciting. They export all of these shells and that. Yeah, so there's a bit of the South in all of these saltwater pearls, I like to say.
So why did they do that? What's the deal about that?
They have found that there are about 6 different species that they like to use in the sort of the Tennessee River Valley, Mississippi River, and those specific mussels have very white shells, or they have very dark shells. If they're culturing a Tahitian pearl, they want that bead, that shell to be dark. But most of them are very close to white, because what they do is they grind, they cut out pieces and they, form a bead, and they tumble it into its little round little bead, and the pearl forms on top of that. So if you use, let's say, a shell like this that has a lot of pink tones in it, you could see that through the pearl. So you want to have white, so when that pearl forms on top of it, you don't see anything under those layers of the pearl. So there's a major difference. So these saltwater pearls have this bead, this little bit of the South in them, and then a freshwater pearl is actually as close to a natural pearl as you can get, because they only have that little bit of tissue. That takes them longer to form, because whereas a saltwater oyster just needs to coat that bead, the freshwater basically has to start from nothing. So it can take anywhere from 3 to 5 years to form a freshwater pearl, where a saltwater, it can take as little as 8 or 9 months, to about 2 years. So that's what you're kind of looking at with there. There's also can be some issues in, and I've found this in my travels, that if you're doing saltwater pearls, you gotta make sure there's enough of that pearl making material on top of those beads. If they don't let it culture long enough, then there's not going to be enough pearl on top of that bead. So freshwater pearls tend to be heavier and denser because they don't have that bead inside of them. Another major difference, and this comes into cost, and I kind of mentioned this, the production of saltwater cultured pearls is expensive. And I traveled to the Philippines last year to see a Golden South Sea Pearl farm, and I mean, they had 300 people on staff living on an island. They have boats patrolling. They have to have security at nighttime to make sure no one comes and steals. And you can imagine it's a small, lot of just islands in the ocean off the coast of the Philippines. So there were a lot of small fishermen out in boats, and they have had issues with people getting into the nets and getting, opening the oysters and stealing the pearls out of them. They also, because it is such a expensive production, they actually, after a year, and with Golden South Sea pearls, they usually stay in the water for 2 years, but they actually, after a year, bring all the oysters up, x-ray them to make sure there's a pearl forming inside, because they don't want to wait 2 years to find out about that. So there are a lot of expenses that go into saltwater pearl productions, as well as the fact that, as I mentioned, if a red tide comes through, if there is pollution, any of that, it can wipe out completely those oysters, and therefore their whole
Do
production.
they sacrifice the oyster when they take the feed out?
That's a good question. So in freshwater, they do. The freshwater mussel has to die when they go, and mainly because it's in that tissue. Saltwater does not have to, but if it's produced a good quality pearl, they're not going to let it go live into old age in the ocean. They're actually going to reculture it. So they will put another bead inside, and with saltwater they can do that up to 3 times. Freshwater they can't, and each time actually they make a larger and larger pearl. It's sort of like, well, when I had my second child, I seemed to be bigger than the first, something like, you have one child and then your second, and somehow like, how did that happen? It was so cute. But anyway, so basically it's made room to have a bigger pearl. So yeah, so they do die. So there's that expense, and let me check my notes on this. Well, another little interesting thing too is that back to kind of the pollution, oysters and mussels are filter feeders. So that means they are constantly just sucking in water and spitting it back out. That's how they eat, basically. So they, like I said, they're very susceptible to any kind of pollutants because they're sucking in all of that water. And it's cool because basically they have to have clean water, but they make clean water. Because they're constantly filtering, they benefit the ecosystem so much. And they're also very good indicators of water quality. So this is a cool thing why I like to go to pearl farms is you can sometimes tell by the yield how good their water quality is, because if they're able to, keep these mussels and oysters alive and sustained, then that is a reflection of their keeping good water quality. In the Chesapeake Bay has become incredibly polluted, and it is because they have overfished their oysters, and they're trying to restock the oysters because they are the ones that are filtering that water, and they can make a huge difference with that. Let's see. And then basically the other big difference in that is going to be, because fresh water is going to be a little more contained, it is easier to control the actual production because it is easier to control the fresh water environment, the lake, all of that. And in fact, they even, from a temperature, because if you think about it, and you've heard about this as well, sometimes species, fish, all of that die in the ocean, and it's even because of temperature changes, not only because of pollution, but in freshwater, if they deal with those temperature changes in the water, they can actually lower all the nets with the mussels a lot easier than they can do on the ocean, so they're just able to kind of control that better. So those are our main differences in saltwater and freshwater. Do y'all have any questions about any of that?